This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Erie to Philadelphia, from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Mara Donnelly. Mara, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, the Trump phenomena continues, doesn't it?
It really does.
And he's surging through Pennsylvania, as well as doing very well in Texas, New Hampshire, in Iowa. How do you explain the Trump phenomena?
Well, I think he just says what's on his mind, and I think people appreciate it. And I thought it would start to wane by now, but it hasn't been. It seems to be getting stronger. So,
it seems in many ways, it seems to be a replay of Ross Perot when he ran. Only I think
I'm not sure I would agree with that.
Okay, I think he's going to stay though, whereas Ross I don't think was ever in to stay. I don't know, maybe I think the secret is immigration. He's speaking about immigration in a different way than anyone else is. But today, speaking of immigration, that leads to transportation and talk about roads. And as you know, in the past, we have done a great deal of discussion here on the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Yes, we have.
And this year is the 75th anniversary of the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Amazing.
And it really is quite an anniversary, isn't it? And in order to honor the Pennsylvania Turnpike and to talk about the history of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, we're very fortunate to have two guests with us. Mark Compton, who's CEO of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Charlie. Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. And Curt Miner, who, Curt, you are the Senior History Curator for the Pennsylvania State Museum.
Yes, thanks.
And there is a special display on right now through the fall for the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Yes, that is correct. The title of the exhibit is The Pennsylvania Turnpike, America's First Superhighway. It's a new addition to our one of our standing galleries at the State Museum of Pennsylvania, and it's going to be opening to the general public on October 2nd, which is actually the day after the 75th anniversary of the Turnpike itself.
Okay. Well, we want to start out with Mark and go back a little further in history. Where did the idea of the Turnpike come from? Because this is the first superhighway in America, isn't it?
Indeed it is. Indeed it is, Charlie. And first I want to thank Curt for being such a great partner. The Museum Commission's done a great job with this initiative and with this event, and we're excited to be hitched to their side, if you will, for our anniversary celebration. Really, the genesis of the Pennsylvania Turnpike was under FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the New Deal, and his philosophy that the public works would get people back to work again. So in 1933, the idea of using an abandoned corridor that was to be for locomotive and train really became the genesis of the Turnpike. And then from 33 to 37, the plans became to fruition. Bonds became available through the feds, and I believe it was August 31st of 38, the first piece of concrete was poured. And then from there, the first 160-mile stretch was open to the public on minute after midnight, October 1st, 1940. And that stretch was from Irwin to Carlisle. The first 160 miles of the Turnpike became a reality that day.
Well, I consider myself a Turnpike expert, especially on that initial stretch there. I drive it a lot to visit my family. And can you tell us a little bit about why we were first? Is there? I mean, it was create jobs, but why? How did we luck out?
Yeah, that's a really good point. One is because the baseline of the infrastructure was in place. Having the abandoned railroad bed meant that there was a corridor that was ready, available to use, and there was ingenuity in Pennsylvania, which I think we can all agree is still here today. Quest to be first, and the fact that we're the Keystone State also was a key part of why Pennsylvania was first picked. So it was Pennsylvanians being aggressive in the approach, and secondly, it was a willingness to really connect Harrisburg, eventually Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but Harrisburg to Pittsburgh.
Okay, so now I'm fascinated. Going through the tunnels, was that part of the railroad bed that was already there, or did they have to do the tunnels?
Yeah, so as part of the railroad bed, there was originally 9 tunnels that were part of the railroad piece.
Yeah.
The Turnpike utilized 7 of those. Now, there was still more work that had to be done back in the 30s, whenever, to connect those. But the original work, I believe, Curt, was the turn of the century.
That's right.
Is whenever the tunnels became part of the way for the railroad, and then the Turnpike initially converted 7, and we still use 5, or we use 5 today.
Yeah. Oh, that's very
Curt,
cool.
maybe you could tell us, what was cross-state automobile travel like in Pennsylvania before the Pennsylvania Turnpike was present?
The most generous way you could describe it would be to say that it was adventurous. And more likely nerve-wracking. And to really appreciate the Turnpike, and I'm glad you made that point, you really have to understand what was there before. And what we did have national highways before the Pennsylvania Turnpike. One that comes to mind immediately in Pennsylvania is the Lincoln Highway, which is better known today as Route 30. But if you've been on Route 30, even today, you know that it doesn't follow a straight path. You typically go up and down those same mountain ranges that the Turnpike tunneled through.
Behind a lot of trucks.
Behind a lot of trucks. It was 2 lanes, it had sharp curves, steep ascents and descents. It was a 9% grade. The Turnpike, by contrast, had about a maximum of 2 to 3% grade. So it was really important, a really important distinction. So the Lincoln Highway, though it provided a connection, did not provide an easy connection, and it was not quick. The average trip between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh would have taken about 7 hours. By contrast, the Turnpike cut that down to about 3.5 hours. Pretty remarkable improvement.
Unless I'm driving, it's a little bit shorter.
And it can get slower, but it really one of the things that I find interesting about the Turnpike is that what made it so unique in its day has become taken for granted today because it's so ubiquitous, because effectively it's been copied across the interstate highway system, which is pretty remarkable for the Turnpike to have been a blueprint for this system we all now appreciate and enjoy most of the time.
I remember seeing photos of a big party the day that it opened. Is that true? The people were in the median and there was picnics going on, and I didn't dream that, did I? That
No,
really happened?
I mean, it's certainly true that the Pennsylvania Turnpike, when it opened, was considered the 8th wonder of the world. It was, people flocked just for the privilege of being on this superhighway, America's answer to the Autobahn, and it was a tourist attraction. So people would just crowd along the Turnpike just for the chance to drive uninterrupted without stopping for stoplights and railroad crossings and so forth, which you'd found on the Lincoln Highway.
Yeah, Mark, I remember in the mid part of the 20th century, as the automobile is becoming a possession that everyone has. My grandparents used to go for a Sunday drive. Everyone after church used to go for a Sunday drive. One of the things they loved to do was go on the Turnpike, and they would drive all the way from Harrisburg to Irwin to have lunch or supper and then drive back, and that was considered to be a day's outing. It's hard to imagine doing that today, but the Turnpike was really welcomed by Pennsylvanians as a great new addition to the transportation system. When was the Turnpike expanded, and to where was it expanded to?
Sure. So I would say World War II sort of stopped some things for the country in its tracks, and that too was true for the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So once the war was over, the plans for expansion became reality once again. So the next stretch to open was from Carlisle to the King of Prussia, a 100-mile stretch. That was around right in the midpoint of the century, right around 1950. The second leg then was from Irwin into on the other side of Pittsburgh all the way to Gateway. And as that was coming under development, we also started the plans for the Northeast Extension, which took the Turnpike up into Scranton, early 1950s. And that's really the footprint you have today for the baseline of what we call the main line. In the 80s, as you know, Act 61 came into existence, and the legislature asked for the Turnpike to take over some construction of some other roadways, mainly the beltway around Pittsburgh, which is continuing on today. So Pennsylvania continues to be on a quest to connect communities across the Commonwealth.
When did the Turnpike become a toll road?
On its initial opening, that was part of the
Okay.
part of the bond, and actually
do you remember? Do you say, Curt, how much did it cost?
Well, you could go round trip between Irwin and Carlisle for $2.25.
Okay.
So it was basically a penny a mile. They discounted round trips to encourage travel, which they really didn't need to do, but they figured that out pretty quickly because it was such a popular route.
Okay.
But yeah, it was about a penny a mile.
Wow. I didn't realize it was from the very beginning. Yeah.
When did the, go ahead.
That really broke the paradigm, Mara, because what we were hearing from the federal government at the time was no one's ever going to pay to ride a road like this. And that broke the paradigm and really started with why New York followed suit shortly thereafter.
And you're absolutely right. Pennsylvania kicks off this toll road building phase across the country. And it's really quite fascinating because the states are ahead of the federal government in this regard, because we did not have a national system at the time. So the states didn't wait around, and which I think is rather interesting. And before Eisenhower steps in and signs the Interstate Defense and Highway Act in 1956, you have I don't know how many states, but a good number of them had already established toll roads. So it's possible by 1955, the year before that act is signed, for someone to drive from Maine to Chicago uninterrupted on tolled state highways, which was pretty remarkable. That again, Pennsylvania pointed the way, that there was another way for people to get around, and they needed another way to get around because, as you're saying, Charlie, we were entering a new phase when we were transitioning from railroads to private automobiles, and it was really important that we had roads that could accommodate this new American way of life.
Well, Curt, what impact did the Turnpike have on the rest of the country, and why did the Turnpike become known as a super highway?
Well, I would to answer your first question, that I think the impact was, as sort of just describing there, that other states began to see the value of having an improved 4-lane, limited access, high-speed automobile route, and followed suit, and to the point where where the federal government started paying attention. That ultimately led to Eisenhower deciding we needed to have a fully integrated interstate highway system. And what then made it so it was a blueprint. I think that's generally true. The second thing I would say is what made it a super highway is that it had all those things that the roads up to that point did not have, and it was fast, it was convenient. You talked about taking trips on Turnpike to, you could go. People went for Sunday drives. They could, but they had places they could stop along the way. We call them service or travel plazas or service plazas today, which would have been unheard of on other highways at the time, where you had to kind of catch as catch can if you're looking for gas or food, and in small towns. The other thing that made it a superhighway is what it didn't have, and I think the most important thing that the Turnpike didn't have that made it a superhighway is it had no obstructions. There was nothing. It was just 4 lanes of open highway with literally the only thing that would stop you is if you decided to exit along one of the 11 designated interchanges, which is remarkable for that time, which no other road operated like that.
So the service plazas were there from the beginning too?
Yes.
Wow.
Howard Johnson's had them from day one.
Oh, I remember. I shouldn't say this, but I remember some Howard Johnson plazas.
And we want to start with Howard Johnson's when we come back and continue this discussion right after this.
They mark the beginning of the nation's first superhighway, the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
The road ahead curves, gliding smoothly through mountains, across valleys, over bridges. Leading to destinations, memories, work trips, day trips, weekend getaways, Sunday drives, Friday rambles. solid, reliable, convenient. Cars, buses, trucks, all are welcome. Seasons change, bringing weather and wonder. Daytime turns to night, then back again. Fresh air blows Pennsylvania breezes. Travelers rest and refresh. The pavement is firm, steering toward the journey's end.
Is that where you're going?
Yes, What's that?
Oh, that's the entrance to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Haven't you ever been over it?
Easy on, easy travel, easy off. Sunset, twilight, or dawn. You're never alone on the Turnpike.
To ensure the safety of our children, to ensure the safety of our motorists, and support the economy of Pennsylvania.
Driving forward, technology enlightens. A past of pride, a presence of vision, a future of innovation. Leading, moving, merging, evolving.
These will be the first phase, if you will, in the Commonwealth of moving our interstate system to 70 miles an hour.
Adapting.
What are we going to do when we hit the real mountains?
Well, you'll see any minute now.
We tunnel right through.
Right.
This is a dream highway.
Fueling progress. Branching outward. Moving forward.
From going to 4 lanes to 6 lanes in this section of roadway.
This is the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
75 years.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by Blackford Ventures, LLC, a private equity firm seeking to make significant investments in real estate, proven business enterprises, and their leaders. Find out more at www.blackfordventures.com. And by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. Mort and I are talking about the Turnpike, the 75th anniversary of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, with our guests. I don't know which one of you would want to field this question. The first restaurant that had the service plazas was really Howard Johnson's, and they had a monopoly. How did that go? Because it seemed to be a great success for many years, and why didn't it continue? What led to the situation that we have today? I guess for both of you.
Well, I'll start, Curt.
Okay.
Maybe you can take it from there. But you know, it's really evolved with our roadway. If you think about the way in 1940 and then through the 50s and 60s, we served a couple purposes. But one was the trips, the vacation destination, to where sitting down for a meal was something that was appreciated and welcomed. And also then for the truck travelers or commercial drivers, so they too looking for a good hot meal. And then
take a break.
Yeah. And as our road evolved, road patterns evolved, we became also a commuter venue as well, and so patterns began to change as well, to where the quick cup of coffee was more sought after than sitting down and having a 45 to an hour meal. So it really changed.
And I just underscore that. I mean, when we were doing research for this exhibit, it's kind of interesting because the Turnpike did have a plan. They followed a plan initially when they laid out those plazas. They thought, well, consumers would want to stop at about every 25 to 30 miles. It was very, it's kind of interesting how centralized this was. But at the same time, as Mark's indicating, they were responsive to changing consumer demands, and including consumers who decided they didn't want to sit down because the pace of life was picking up, and probably a lot of things that would explain that, and they adapted. And what I think is interesting, looking at the history of the Turnpike, is the fact that it has a constancy, but it's also has been very adaptable to what the market demands and what consumers were demanding, and they've made adjustments throughout their history to improve motorist convenience and safety.
Well, I think we can single-handedly blame it on my father, who had 4 children and who would time us at rest stops. We were not allowed to take any more time than necessary. So, Curt, can you tell us, I want to ask you a specific question. What's your favorite piece in the current exhibit that's opening this month or soon?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about other pieces that we can see.
Well, I'd have to say that my heart is probably most with the largest artifact that visitors will see when they come to this exhibit, which is one of the sort of icons of the historic Pennsylvania Turnpike. It's the toll booths. We were fortunate enough several years ago to acquire what I will call one of the original toll booths from the original section of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It was actually the toll booth that we have, I would say, meticulously reconstructed for this exhibit. Was originally stood at the Irwin interchange of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. For viewers, the Irwin interchange was, as Mark was saying, the original western terminus of the Turnpike. So it was a really significant gateway. So we acquired this with some assembly required. The toll booth had been disassembled, and this again speaks to the Turnpike's adaptation over the years. The toll booths were really important, but things changed over time, and in the late 1970s, the Turnpike Commission began decommissioning the original toll booths, which were really quite iconic. They were streamlined, they were hexagonal, and they were very distinctive. They appeared on postcards. It was part of what you saw when you went on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, along with some other really interesting things like the tunnels and the service plazas we always spoke about. So we thought, well, we can't bring a service plaza here. We can't rebuild a tunnel, but we could rebuild one of the toll booths, and that's what we did. And it's quite remarkable. And it's even as we were reassembling this, even folks in the museum were coming by and saying, "I remember those," So we're reconstructing we call it a sort of vignette, a typical scene that will anchor this. The new upgrade in the museum gallery will show a 1948 Packard passing through the Irwin toll booth on its way to America's first superhighway. To help make that a little bit more engaging for people, we are fortunate to draw on an outstanding collection of film, photographs, and artifacts that the Turnpike Commission itself has for many years curated. And I have to give kudos to the Turnpike Commission here for being one of the most history-conscious state agencies I've ever encountered. They're really quite aware of their history, they respect it, and they use it as a touchstone, as they're obviously doing this year for the 75th.
In fact, isn't there a small museum, or there has been in the past, is it still there, a small museum at the Turnpike headquarters on the Turnpike itself?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of memorabilia that's displayed at our facility, and a great timeline wall that lays out from the early days on to today, and that lays out sort of the progress we've made as a commission.
And I might add, I don't want to miss this opportunity to also commend the Turnpike Commission for a roadside museum of sorts that's at the South Midway Plaza, which has, again, historic photographs, and memorabilia for visitors. And so it's kind of nice to see all these sort of places where visitors, the motoring public and hopefully visitors who come to the State Museum can access this history of America's first superhighway.
So 75 years ago, we were cutting edge. We developed the first superhighway. How are you continuing to keep pace with that? You've got quite a history to keep up with. So
we do.
What new innovations can you expect?
Well, we're just as excited about the next 75 years as we were about the last 75 years. And the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission has continued to be innovative. And if you think back in the 80s to where the issue we had with our long stretches of highway were folks who would tend to drift off and fall asleep. We had a lot of drifting accidents. So those rumble strips you see that we call snaps on the side of the roadway, used all over the world, started at the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. 2011, our Trip Talk application that we're very proud of for our smartphone. It was the first ever hands-free, eyes-free phone app for the Pennsylvania Turnpike. This coming year, we're going to be testing the ability to use cell phones to collect tolls. So we believe we're going to have.
I like that idea.
Yeah, we believe we're going to be able to do that, offer that to our customers within the next year or so. We're not resting on our laurels.
That's good.
The ideas of what were 75 years ago in the design of our roadway. If you live in an older home, you know it's time to sometimes change the windows out. Well, we're in the process of doing that with our 550-mile roadway. We've got over 115 miles of our roadway that have been fully restored, and we're in the process of continuing that. And I know, Mara, we've talked about the construction that you have out there.
Much appreciated.
And that's where the goal is to be 6 lanes, 3 in each direction of continuous travel through the heartland of our facility.
The entire stretch of the turnpike?
That's the goal. Now, it's going to take a while.
Oh,
it's going to take a while,
that's a great goal, though.
but that's the goal.
And Curt, in the last 10 seconds, can you tell us again, when is the exhibit opening in the State Museum and for how long?
The exhibit will open on October 2nd of 2015, in about 3 weeks as this show is being taped. And it will be, it's a long-term upgrade, so it will be there for a good long time. It's going to be located on the 2nd floor of the State Museum in our Industry and Transportation Gallery.
Okay, well, Mark and Curt, we want to thank both of you for coming today and for sharing with us and our viewers this wonderful anniversary of the Turnpike. And we will see you again next week on a new edition of Behind the Headlines. You can catch us again on Facebook, and you can catch us on YouTube, in addition to the voiceofpa.net. We'll see you next week.